Hey guys, this week on The Angry Physio, yoga. Yes, the good, the bad, and the angry, I'm going to call it. Is it for you? Is it not for you? Do I like yoga? Do I ever prescribe it for patients? I have lots of opinions, and we're going to talk about a lot of them. I'm going to reveal to you guys two positions that I hate and I would never prescribe to patients. I think they're dangerous. People who are yoga instructors get into it with me. I've been yelled at. I had patients who are yoga instructors walk out on an evaluation. I don't care. I think the public needs to be informed. You need to be informed. So we're going to talk about two positions. No, but there's good with it too. There's also two positions that I think are fantastic. And one of the positions that I will reveal to you, I have done, and it has benefited me quite a bit. So, yoga, the good, the bad, and the angry. Let's get started. All right, guys. First, I want to talk to you about maybe who yoga is not for. So, who is yoga not for? I don't think yoga is for people who are what I would call hypermobile or who have hypermobility syndrome. Another way to look at this would be people that have high degrees of flexibility in their joints, just kind of naturally, although sometimes it can be imposed. Sometimes I've heard the lay term also double jointed, which sort of feeds into that idea, just to give you an idea. I would say also that in most cases, it's pretty obvious when somebody has hypermobility. For example, if we want to take a look at this photo here for a second, when somebody stands, if somebody stands with their knees locked out and they're kind of hyperextended back a little bit, that can be a sign of hypermobility. I've also seen that with the elbows, by the way. If some people, their elbows look like they kind of bow back a little bit, and perhaps not the best position to be in if you're in a down dog, etc., with that lockout. Another quick and dirty thing that you can do is check hamstrings length. So if you lie on your back and you have someone lift one leg up to see how far back it's going to go, you can get a hint as to what your end range is going to feel like. And ladies and gents, some people just have an obscene amount of range that you can see. Some people will go past 90 degrees. I would say that a lot of textbooks will say that about 80 to 90 degrees is pretty normative. Women might be more along the lines of 90 degrees. Men might be more along the lines of 80 degrees. So perhaps you should take that into consideration in terms of whether you need to be stretching. If you can kick that leg back like the Rockettes 120 degrees, do yourself a favor and skip yoga. Maybe Pilates would be a better idea for you. And more on that later. And let me make a little distinction here that I hinted at before. There are people that have way too much range of motion due to inherent flexibility that they're born with, but also we're going to see people who got themselves to that large amount of flexibility from stretching way too hard for way too long. For some people, doing a fun activity like yoga can become a bit of an obsession. And it troubles me because it's hard to see that in yourself. It's very hard to be objective. So to me, once again, if you have too much range of motion, you can get yourself to the point where you aren't even really stretching your muscles anymore with the yoga positions. You get to the point where you just start stretching your joint capsules, which I think is super dangerous. I have had what I would call the coming to Jesus conversation with one or two yoga teachers in my day who have come to the clinic because they had back pain. And when I tell them, maybe you shouldn't be doing this is not a good idea, they don't want to hear it. I had a yoga teacher tell me that I was silly for insinuating that perhaps the amount of stretching that she was doing was causing her pain. And I'm like, you realize that you're sitting here in an orthopedic clinic, right? So, I'm just giving you the best advice that I can. And to throw in a second group of people who should maybe think twice about doing yoga, I would include people who have active disc issues in their spines, aka disc herniations. A disc issue usually is manifested as pain that can be in your back or your neck, and it tends to peripheralize, meaning that it shoots down your leg, shoots down your arm. It's usually quite painful. Get this checked out by a doctor first before even trying something like yoga, because I've seen cases where people have had a disc herniation and I thought maybe they'd try yoga to kind of help them out, and it did the exact opposite. We've talked about who yoga maybe isn't for. Who is yoga for? I would probably say most sedentary type people who don't fall into the hypermobile category could probably get some benefit from yoga. And I would probably say men in particular would tend to benefit from yoga because we tend to be a bit stiffer and have less range of motion than do women. Anybody who generally lacks some range of motion and feels a bit stiff in their spine, give it a whirl, see what happens. There's even some evidence that I'm pointing out here, you can see from the study on the screen, that suggests that you're sedentary and have various types of arthritis, even rheumatoid arthritis. Maybe there's some benefit to it. Give it a try. Now let's go on to some of the poses. So this is the Angry Physio after all, so let's start with one or two yoga poses that I have a big problem with. And I can say that out of all of the poses that cause injury, I have seen most injuries in my clinic over the years from two specific poses. Drum roll, please. Pigeon. Here I am trying to demonstrate the pigeon position. And I can tell you, and you can see that it's kind of difficult for me to get into this position. Wow. I look kind of stiff there. It's kind of sad. Notice that you end up placing a significant portion of your body weight down through that hip joint, of that leg that's kind of kicked in front of you like that. No thanks, guys. To me, this is an impingement position of the hip. And especially if you can see somebody who really gets deep into that position, I cringe. I think like that, they are grinding their hip joint with that. And from an anatomical perspective, you don't want bone slamming up against bone. The ball basically is slamming up into the socket. And I think that position, if it's abused and if you go really hard into it, it can maybe result in hip labral pathology. I believe that happens. And I've seen several patients in the last couple of years who had sudden onset of really intense groin pain that would not go away, that started right after they did some aggressive pigeon positions. So is the research out there that points to these types of injuries happen? Well, I did find a few things. So first, we have an article here that took a look at yoga-related injuries that showed up at a particular emergency room over a period of 7 years. And I have to say that I found it a little bit surprising that people injure themselves so acutely that they end up going to the ER. I usually don't see that. It's usually not something that requires immediate attention, but they do end up in pain. They do end up in an outpatient clinic. It does say that the people who went to these ERs were disproportionately more women than men, which, you know, women do yoga more than men do, and women tend to be a bit more flexible, so I don't find it that surprising. The 2018 article by Mears et al. Lists pigeon as one yoga position that surgeons need to educate their patients about regarding stressing the hip joint, particularly after hip replacement surgeries. When I looked at this article, I thought it was a bit weird, only for the reason that I would never, ever recommend someone who has had a hip replacement to do the pigeon pose, because I just think you're asking for it. And I think you'd be hard pressed to find a physical therapist out there that would be okay with you doing a pigeon position after a hip replacement. It's a prosthetic joint and it's only meant to go through so much range, so you don't want to be pushing it. So bottom line, you're never going to get my approval to go deep into the pigeon pose. You can stretch your hip muscles in a similar way by doing what I'm doing right here. Just lie down on your back and give a gentle pull through your shin and your knee, kind of in that diagonal direction. If you think about it, it's very similar to a pigeon, but you're not planting your weight through it. Same idea, way less stress on the hip joint. You get a nice little buttock piriformis hip stretch with it, and it's safer.
Oh, oh, I'm okay. I'm all right.
Jesus. That was a dramatic reenactment of the first yoga class that I took. When I took my first yoga class, the woman next to me, when we were trying to get in a headstand pose, keeled over to the side and knocked into the wall. I obviously put those boxes there just for dramatic effect. It made a nice sound, by the way. Also, I thought it was pretty cool. It didn't take much of a search on PubMed to find articles which suggest that yoga injuries to the neck and head are very often caused by headstand positions. In fact, it's listed right here as the top one, front and center. In the clinic, I've seen a couple of cases where patients were doing headstands and they lost their balance, and then they had pain shooting down their arm for months. They give themselves a stinger or cinch a nerve root in their cervical spine, and that's a neurological injury, and that's serious. So I would definitely not think twice about telling patients, don't do that. To kind of illustrate the idea as to why I have a problem with this, I am drawing out here in this video a representation of what a lumbar spine vertebrae looks like. The lumbar spine is the lower back, and the cervical spine. The cervical spine are the vertebrae up by the head and consisted of the neck vertebrae. Now we can see here, I'm drawing a lumbar vertebrae, and what I'm drawing there is the bone. The bone is really thick, and that first illustration I did at the top is kind of a side view, and the second illustration that I'm doing right here is as if we were looking right down through the vertebrae, and I believe I'm going to color in here. That is a non-bone structure. That's actually part of the canal where the actual nerve travels. So lots of bone there meant to take weight. Now, if we look at the cervical spine, here's kind of a side view. It's kind of a funky looking cervical vertebrae. It's thin. It's not as thick as the lumbar spine. Hence, it's not really equipped to take the weight of your whole body. And the bottom right illustration there, as you can see, is kind of the looking down through the canal, through the vertebrae. And as we can see here, once again, there's not a lot of bone and there's a lot of space for the neural structures. And those two little dots on the side are for the vertebral arteries. So case in point, cervical vertebrae are not meant to take a lot of weight at all. I did have one practitioner of yoga tell me once, he said, but Dan, you get great blood flow to your head when you do that. But you know what? Here's another way you can get blood flow to your head. Here, I made another little dramatic video for you guys. Take a look at this. Wow. A lot safer, huh? I just stuck my head down between my legs when I was sitting down. Pretty weak argument, but I mean, that's a really easy thing to do. All right, enough hate for one day. I'm done with it. I feel a lot better. I'm going to tell you a couple of yoga positions that I think are great. The first one, which is the modified down dog position, which you can see right here. I did this position for a few months and it made a massive difference in my mobility, specifically my hamstrings length, my ability to touch my toes. I was always one of those people that was never able to touch his toes, no matter how hard I could try. And I tried stretching my hamstrings like you've probably seen or heard a million times. I gave it up. I don't have my patients do that. I don't think you can really get much of an increase in range in hamstring length simply by stretching your hamstrings. But if you look at this down dog position, what I'm doing is I'm just kind of slightly bending one knee and then bending the other knee. I call that flossing. I'm just kind of flossing my hamstrings. And if you do this multiple times over, weeks and months, it kind of trains your hamstrings to learn how to let go. And I definitely had better mobility after this. So I highly recommend that especially if you have hamstring length issue, if your hamstrings are super short, try it. You'll probably be happy with what your results will be. And here, ladies and gentlemen, is another pose that I like. The tree. I believe it's called tree. Yes, look at this. It's pretty simple. You're standing on one leg. You're balancing. What can be bad about that? I love it. You're training balance in one leg, safely, of course. And if you can see here in the tree position that the other leg, the foot kind of slides up the leg and then rests there. That, in my opinion, makes it a little bit easier to do. So maybe if you want a little bit more of a challenge, maybe just kind of slightly remove that knee off of that. That's going to make it harder to do. And I would also tell people on your stance leg, don't lock out. Let your knee just kind of just slightly unlock. It's going to challenge your muscles a little bit better. Single leg balance, by the way, you have two mechanisms to right yourself when your balance is getting perturbed. One is through your ankles, the other is through your hips. So the ankles kick in first. So when you do this type of thing, you may find that you start to get tired around your foot or your ankle. Totally normal. And you might also feel like you're getting a little bit of a workout in your hip. Highly recommended. And that's about it for today. Please subscribe, rate, review, get notifications, do all that fun stuff. Tell your friends. If you have any other specific yoga positions that you want me to perhaps be critical and not judgmental about, let me know. Kick me a comment. Have a good one. Thanks for watching The Angry Physio.